And we're on the air with Wire 106, a new season, Season 4, Episode 1.
Right? No corner left behind. That's what's on the DVD. So the DVD, let me get it. Hold on.
All right.
Yeah, on the DVD box. Obviously, this is the education series, and if you listen to the commentary of episode 1, this episode, Ed Burns actually taught in the Baltimore City School District, and on the actual box, you'll see it there. It says, "No corner left behind," which I think is such a great kind of joke. And I don't know if it's specific. I don't know if they say it in the season. We have to watch it through to see. But nice little joke there that kind of sets the stage for season 4.
Yeah.
Speaking of setting the stage for season 4, one of the things now that Simon talks about again and again every season is the opening sequence of the first episode of a season really setting the stage for the entire season. And given that this is probably one of the most memorable opening sequences of any episode of any season, it might be worth taking a quick look at Snoop shopping at the, what do they call it? It's not Home Depot, although it's based on Home Depot.
Yeah, like Hardware Depot or something like that.
Yeah, I think it's called, I have a picture of it. It's called the Hardware Barn.
Yeah.
And it's got a big circular saw in the middle. Like, here's the, actually, let me give you I have a quick screenshot. I just love this, like they're playing on that. The Hardware Barn, and it's one of those things where you could see the students who did the, who did the one for, what was it called? They did the buying one where they did everything was a promotion. This would be perfect. And there it is, the Hardware Barn. And you see Snoop here walking back to the car, but I just love that visual.
Yeah.
Playing with brands.
So here I've got a shot of this is a bit of the sales pitch that the salesman gives.
The DX460 is fully automatic with a 27 caliber charge. Wood, concrete, steel to steel, she'll throw a fastener into anything. And for my money, she handles recoil better than the Simpson or the P3500. Now, you understand what I mean by recoil?
Yeah, the kickback. I wish.
That's right.
27 caliber, huh?
Yeah, not large ballistically, but for driving nails, it's enough. Any more than that, you'd add to the recoil.
Man, shit. I seen a tiny ass 22 wearing those drop the nigga plenty of days, man. Motherfuckers get up there and you like a pinball, rip your ass up. Big joints though, big joints, man. Just break a bone, just say fuck it. I'm gonna go with this right here, man. How much I owe you?
$669 plus tax. No, you just pay at the register.
No, man, you go ahead and handle that for me, man. And keep the rest for your time.
This is $800.
So what, man? You earned that bump like a motherfucker, man. Keep that shit.
Yeah. Yeah, Snoop really, she comes into her own this season.
Yeah.
And, I think Stephen King referred to her as the most horrifying character in American fiction. Which I think is a really interesting assessment of Snoop. I mean, she is, and this is one of her most memorable scenes.
Yeah. I remember the first time I saw it, because I've seen it a few times now, so I can sort of understand what she was saying.
Yeah.
But all I could get out of it was, the reaction to this guy that this is really scary, and he doesn't quite understand it, but it's not what he's talking about.
And it's interesting because, if this scene is a parable for the education system and for, it's interesting because he comes across as the teacher telling her, and she knows a lot, right? And she has a very particular use for how she's going to use it, right? And talking about 22 caliber and understanding recoil. So there's that interesting kind of, but then she goes back to the car. And she tells Chris all these things. And she's like, I'm trying to educate you, and we could be using this for far more than just, closing up doors to hide bodies. We could be using this to kill people, right? So there's that whole weird kind of twisted notion of where the education system has led us, and our attempt to educate, in some ways doing more harm than good. I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's a very tricky line to walk. But the predefined or predetermined notion of so many of these kids in Baltimore, in the city of Baltimore, which we'll really start seeing these 4 kids who carry the season, carry the whole season. They're just brilliant. And, the meditation upon what that means.
Yeah, there's a line that comes up later in the season. Bunny Colvin says, that the teachers are teaching them what they think they need to know, but the kids are learning for what's in their world.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what you see going on there.
Exactly. Yeah, it's actually something that now we start to see different people who we know kind of bought into that field, right? It actually is a nice transition to the epigraph, right? Like, so the epigraph for this episode, the start of the season, is something to the degree of like lambs to the slaughter. I mean, is that what it is?
Yeah, there we have it. Like lambs to the slaughter here.
Yeah. Spoken by the assistant principal of Tillman Middle School.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting kind of context for that,
And the spoken of Presbolewski coming in as a new teacher.
Yes, exactly. Although their ears prick up when they find out he's a cop.
Yeah.
In the city, right? Like they actually like, oh, which is worth mentioning that Ed Burns, I think we said it, he talks about it in the commentary for this episode of being a cop. I mean, being a cop for 20 years and then being a teacher in the city for 7, and saying that was the hardest and the most rewarding work he did during his 27-year career in public service. And it's just interesting to hear him talk a little bit about being a teacher and how it's a lot cleaner when you're a cop because you have the good guys and the bad guys to some degree. And it's easy for you to fall between that. But with the kids, you're trying to cross that chasm and bring many of these awesome, amazing kids, help them in any way you can, whether that be through personal interaction, engagement, education, and this loss of innocence and the very importance of the kid's age, whether it be 13 or 14 in middle school, really at that crucial moment in their kind of burgeoning adulthood. Really, it's why the Wire chose these 4 kids that were that age and tried to kind of capture that moment of transition to adulthood. And it's a really interesting kind of, almost ethnographic sociological study, as much as it is, I think, a take on Stephen King's The Body. So there's like so many different things happening that just make this such a magical season.
Yeah. I pulled a shot of 3 of the kids.
Yeah.
We just look at that.
What? Oh, shit. Randy got an idea.
The main point of looking at that is you see, like, there's 3 of the 4 main characters there, and they're all smiling, happy little kids, playing around. And that's not going to last for the whole season.
Right. I mean, you could argue that doesn't even last the whole episode. Right? Like, so, but you're right. I mean, it's that moment where they're trying to capture them as kids in this first episode and where that ultimately leads to by the end of the season. And the season is 13 episodes. Is really, you're right. It's a remarkable transition that they're capturing.
Yeah.
It's a bit depressing.
Actually, my wife said just a moment ago that this was like the hardest season to watch because in the other ones you're dealing with adults and they're more or less responsible for their actions, but the kids are just born into this.
Yeah, and I also think, I mean, that's absolutely right. And I also think, one of the things to think about, and we've mentioned this study a few times, I mean, at the beginning of the semester in September, right? The study that a 25-year longitudinal study about, kids who are born and raised in inner city Baltimore and how few of them, like a fraction, of the population actually gets out, and how this kind of predetermined notion of what these kids will be is what this, like that study, that's what the season is studying. It's what the season is really looking at, and there is a certain amount of implication of the education system, national policies like No Child Left Behind, and how much they kind of miss the point of an education in a community that's going to try and take care of these kids and reinforce some of the resources they just don't have. It's a damning season, and I think, like your wife said, because you're dealing with kids, right, not adults. It's horrible.
Something that study said was that the few that made it out were ones that were born with certain advantages.
Yeah.
They had parents with blue-collar jobs, or two parents living together, or they were born white.
Yeah.
All these little things that they had going for them at the beginning is basically what carried them through.
Yeah, it will be interesting to look at that, think about that as we watch the emergence of these characters. So, yeah, that's cool. One of the things I thought was interesting, I took a screenshot of, is, we start this season, so one of the interesting things and compelling to me is, you're starting a whole new season, and it's been a year since your audience has probably seen it. I mean, we're watching it very differently because it's a decade after the season even airs. But, you're waiting a year. So you have a scene like this with Lester explaining to Griggs and to the assistant district attorney, whose name is I'm blanking on, but it will come back. Perlman. Yeah, there you go. He's explaining basically the Marlowe situation, and this is that moment in this episode where we're getting a whole lot of exposition. Barksdale's gone, Marlowe's in charge, they're up on the wire, and I really love how seamlessly they do it. You don't even realize, so many shows fall down on the exposition part. They spend 15 minutes and it's completely pedantic. And I think it's just funny how this show is not pedantic. This show is the opposite of our educational system or of our police departments. It's actually poetic and seamless, and it demands that you watch closely, and it gives you the credit of being intelligent. And this is a great scene for that, because you have the board on the background, which Ed Burns says in the commentary, is like another character in this season now. It's or this series. The board is actually another character that gives you a frame of what's what. And I really love them discussing this exposition, how seamless it was.
And Lester's sweater there has that chessboard on it, so it's got that whole metaphor carried through very subtly there.
That is nice. Let me bring that back up, because yeah. Not only is he classy, but he's symbolic. Yeah, there it is.
Yeah, cool Lester Smooth, yeah.
And that's what the cool Lester Smooth is. That's exactly where they say it. And he's a little bit cocky now. There's no one who can escape him. He's going to get them.
Yeah, I mean, he sort of says that, he's not being cocky. It's just a fact. He's going to get him.
And it's interesting because this is the first time we hear it, and this is a theme that runs through the whole season, is, okay, we have the cell phones, we have them, but we can't produce any bodies and no real reports, right? So you have this ongoing mystery of a different kind, because he seems to at first bemoan the absence of real intelligent crooks like Avon and the Barksdale crew. But I think he underestimates Marlowe. So.
Yeah.
Cool.
Another thing that's going on is the political end is still running. And Carcetti is running for mayor, but they have this beautiful shot of the city hall here.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
And I just had to pull that whole thing in because I love that.
Well, it's actually really. I don't know if I mean, I have to find the shot, but it's really reminiscent of All the President's Men, right? When they're in the Library of
Yeah.
Congress and they're capturing the rotunda, and it comes down to those two there doing their research. And it's an interesting, very interesting shot about those institutional shots. And I know that one of the Marxist theorists, Frederick Jameson, has written a lot about those conspiracy films from the 70s, like All the President's Men, Conversation, Parallax View, 3 Days of the Condor, like the whole conspiracy paranoia film. And so they talk a lot about these institutional spaces as the production of that. And it's interesting when I saw that shot, it's the first thing I thought about. And it's also interesting, too, is who do you cut to or cut from in that scene? Herc, right? Who's a kind of Secret Service man, and he's dressed like, like a Fed. And that's an interesting, like, disorientation that you get right away in this season. Like, what the hell is Herc doing?
Yeah, now he's working for the mayor as like the police protection to him, I suppose.
That's right.
As he shows up, he pulls the truck up to the front, right past the sign that says "Do not enter." That's sort of like something about Herc, I guess. He's always taking that shortcut.
Yeah. And they also have that internal joke where he was goofed the whole last season about who would he sleep to, what man would he sleep with, or what would he do sexually to sleep with, the Olsen twins. And in some weird way, like a councilwoman or a judge walks by and she's attractive, and the other woman said, "I'd sleep with you to get to her." And he gets all like freaked out by it because of the whole thing last season. So there's this weird ongoing joke between seasons. That's off color, obviously, but it's also like it's just the way they do it. Like the seasons meld. The universe is much broader. And
and that's also something about how they introduce characters. But that was the city council president that walked by, Nerese Campbell. And she becomes a more important character. I think it's more towards season 5. It might happen in this season.
That's right. Season 5.
You saw the same thing happen with Colvin. I think he showed up in season 2 just as kind of like an extra on the scene, knowing that he was going to be a major player.
Yeah, that's true, and it's a sign also of how complex and thought out the universe is, that you can bring these things in earlier, produce them later. Another shot I really loved, based on that shot, which I really liked what you did. I mean, it's different, but it's a shot that struck me. It's when we first see, I think it's the first time we're introduced to the Corner Boys, who we're going to be following over the course of the season. And you get this picture of Namon, and he's reading Don Diva, which is actually, from what I understand, Ed Burns has talked about, it's actually a magazine or periodical that, Corner Boys will read about the styles and the life. And it's a magazine that has gone national, according to Burns, which I think is fascinating. This is back in 2004. But I just love this shot of Namon, and then who comes in the scene, and I don't have the video, is his friends. Yeah. And like they all come together and they're on the street. This is how we're introduced to them on the corner, and Namon reading this in this magazine. And it's still, again, a kid, right? Doesn't really want to be in the corner, wants to go play and catch doves or pigeons in the back alleys. Like, there's that really brilliant kind of framing of that sense of innocence that movie looked like.
The thing that struck me about that scene was the sky in the background.
Yes, great.
I don't know what they did to that, like photographically, but it seemed like there's this huge storm coming, even though it's broad daylight.
Yeah, that's really perceptive, because I think that's one of the things that drew me to it. And like it's wide angle, so you have him there, and the storm is out there, right, coming. Brilliant. The other thing, if we're thinking about visuals, and this is another one I kind of all over the season, and we'll see it regularly throughout the season, and it will kind of follow, I think, the trajectory of the season as a theme, is the signage. And all the political signage everywhere. Like behind Carver, you see the Royce, and that's everywhere. If you look closely in the shots, when fruit is going in, with Lex's girlfriend. There's the Dempster one there. Just the signage is everywhere, and it's also a beautiful shot. But I just love the constant reiteration of what's happening in the political sphere is also affecting and affected by and informing what's going on in the corner. I just think it's interesting.
Yeah, and that scene you had there also ties back to the scene in the last season where Colvin was like taking Carver to task for not knowing the people on the corners.
Yes.
And what Carver was actually doing there was, you know, having a friendly conversation with
Yeah,
Bodie.
and Carver comes a long way. I mean, even in this episode, he's trying to help Bunk locate Lex before he's shot. And, I think, is it McNulty who realizes, Carver actually is becoming police, right? Like, there is that sense between Bunk and Jimmy that Carver's on the up and up, or just kind of listening to Bunny and kind of having learned last season.
Yeah. Yeah.
But speaking of shots, I don't know. I know you have more. I want to show one more, though. And then
I only pulled a few, but
this is one that struck me based on some of the other work we've done together as teaching and our interest in film noir and true crime. We talk a lot about the Western in The Wire. There's a lot of it. But there's also a lot of noir, and there's a lot of the dark shadows. And I think one of the most compelling pieces of season 4 is Chris and Snoop's relationship and what they're doing with the bodies, and that whole scene where you see those row houses and they're like tombstones, right? Like,
yeah.
And here's a scene that's very much, it could be out of a 40s black and white noir film. And this is Chris who's killing one of his victims, we don't know who, through a plastic bag so they can clean it up easily and put lime on top of them. And there's just this really, not only is it, a beautiful shot, there's a beautiful season, very kind of shadowy and black and white, but there's also this methodical nature of, the business of it that's disturbing at the same time. Like, it's this disturbing relationship between the beauty of the scene and the horror of the reality behind it. And that's always striking.
Yeah, and Chris has this really interesting attitude towards the people he's shooting. He's like calming and reassuring and friendly. Don't worry, I'll make it quick. You won't feel a thing. It's all good.
Yeah, I'll take care of you, right? Like, don't worry, I'll take care of you. Like, it's like, wow, it is really interesting. Like, Chris and Snoop and the way in which Marlowe deals with his business in terms of that is a really interesting modification of what we saw with the Barksdale crew and what we're used to. It's interesting.
Yeah, like it's all not even the game. It's all business.
Yeah.
This is just what we do. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, and it really, again, it's another moment that's reflected in Snoop going to buy the 27 caliber nail gun. We had 5 jobs last month. Like, like this idea of it like being construction jobs. Like, it's just labor to her. You know what I mean? Like, it's just an interesting take on it. Yeah. Fascinating. And speaking of labor, we have the whole political campaign going on. Carcetti, who's becoming increasingly annoying. There's no two ways about it, especially when he hears about having to go and do the cold calls to raise money. And that's an interesting scene because he's stuck in this room and there's those above shots of him in those rooms, and you have this Baltimore Orioles thing with Rafael Palmeiro right there. So, like, that's really him in the season. And it's just interesting, not only the detail of it, but the shot and him being stuck in this room where if you come out without $30,000, you're dead. Especially playing off these people who are put in these rooms that are truly dead in these abandoned houses. So there's this kind of play going on between the political and the business of the political and the business of the street.
Yeah, Maggie wrote up a really nice bit about that whole thing, that Tommy just seems like this unruly teenager for the whole thing.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely right. And he becomes less and less likable as a character.
Yeah.
Although in some ways more complex, but not any more likable.
Yeah. Um, there's actually another shot of Tommy that I pulled, and this is like really right towards the end of the episode. Um, but the thing that drew me to it was at the end of season 3, you see the same kind of shot with Avon and Stringer.
Yeah.
Over the harbor, you see those like lights in the background that are just like totally so far out of focus. They're just like blooming there. Um, and it just seemed like an interesting visual connection to that.
Well,
Like they were talking about their dreams, and he's sort of like talking about his dream and how it's like slipping away.
it's also interesting because it's the same director. Chappelle, is that his name? Joe Chappelle.
Okay.
He
Yeah.
did episode 11, which is out from season 3, and he also did episode 1. He did this one, and so I wonder if that's also like kind of like the episodes seem to all go so seamlessly between each other. But I wonder if, as you watch it a number of times, you start to see the mark of these different directors and their way of communicating some of that. And it's interesting because Joe Chappelle is also now an executive co-producer.
Mm-hmm.
So he seemed to have gotten promoted from season 3 to season 4, and he's going to have a much bigger role, I imagine, in the vision of this season, which would be interesting to see that.
Yeah. Part of it is, you've got different directors and different writers, but the editors carry through. The director of photography, I believe, carries through.
Yeah.
So you've got that consistency underneath.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so it's interesting, and it's funny because watching it this time around, I'm beginning to recognize details like who's doing what. Like, we wouldn't have known about Jen Ralston unless we were turned on to her amazing work and started thinking more and more. Like, I really loved what Brittany did yesterday by pointing out again the barking dogs with Jimmy in episode 12 when he goes back to kind of hook up with Beatrice again. I mean, that stuff is like, it's just a far more complex world now, thanks to all these details, and you start paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All the details matter, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, we talked about this a little bit, and I'm going to show these two. This is the one, there are two here. There's 2 shots I'm going to show back to back, so hold on a second and make sure I have them both. But this is the scenes where we're seeing actually the teachers back together for the first time. And that's being juxtaposed with the police department. And so it's interesting. We'll take a look at this right quick. So here we have the teachers who are back at school in this. We kind of moving from the summer, and we get introduced to Prez. And so here they are. We have this IALAC. If you get a little closer look, this is the kind of consultant they brought in, and it's basically like the acronym is I am lovable and what?
Caring or concerned?
Caring or concerned or just nonsense, right? And the teachers kind of revolt. And they're like, well, how does that deal with the kid who pulls the, pencil sharpener off? Or like, how does it really deal with their context? It's just this kind of blatant, produced bullshit that they have to kind of push down and pay money, and the frustration runs deep. Well, the same thing happens with the police department, right? They have that back and forth, and here they're talking about terrorism. And I think it's Santangelo who says, if terrorists got to West Baltimore, who would know? Again, there was that big joke going on, and they reference a local kind of stick-up man named Apex. That was an internal joke, but it's just this interesting kind of pairing of the police department and the teaching, and what it kind of means, these kind of bullshit consultants that come in and get paid top dollar to produce these binders of information that no one will use and is not really relevant because it's so kind of generalized to the lowest common denominator of concerns that it actually doesn't deal with any specific issue that anybody's dealing with, which I think is really kind of a fascinating critique embedded in this first episode.
Yeah. Yeah, and the way it brings them back to back, you know, that mirroring is so deliberate, and just the way the scenes run is the same thing. Someone's giving this dry presentation, and then the crowd just revolts with
Yeah.
what's really going on. You know,
And it's interesting because I like the ways, in some ways, that it separates out the institution from the people who work within it. And there's a constant tension, like the people who work with institution aren't necessarily the institution. Like they want to revolt against it. They see the bullshit inherent in it, but there are so many factors that force them to play along. So there's actually this interesting way in which they capture that here, right? Like Santangelo is dumb, right? You know, these teachers are dumb, but at the same time, they're part of this institution. And that tension is the magic of the show. It's to capture it and to produce it and to show it rather than kind of collapse it.
yeah, 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 and then it ties back to Ed Burns, who like lived in both of those worlds. You
Yeah,
know.
exactly. Which makes him a really compelling character. I mean, it was the first commentary he did. And Simon was doing it with him. And if you want, I'd recommend listening to it on episode 1 for anyone who's interested. But Simon really says this is Ed Burns' season. Like, he worked with Prop Joe, who was actually a local, ran a local actors group in Baltimore. And he helped get the kids up to snuff, you know, prepare them for this. And they filmed them over 6 months. And you can actually even see them age. And Burns was there the whole way, picking the kids, focusing in on who they were, looking for particular types. It's really his commentary is really brilliant. So, highly recommend.
Yeah. There's another pair of scenes where you have the principal and the vice principal discussing the schedule, and you know, we can't put this teacher out there alone. The kids will eat him alive. And then they cut to Major Daniels. He's the major now, and Jay Landsman, whoever he's playing, Mello, that's the guy's
Yeah,
name,
that's right.
discussing one of their like patrol characters. You know, he's that guy who looks like Opie Cunningham, just less fierce. You know.
That's right. What a great line.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then Jimmy comes in, and Jimmy's like, "Nope, thank you." Like, no part of, you know. And they think he's being wasted, but there's also the influence, the suggestion that Jimmy's doing what's good for Jimmy. You know,
Yeah.
at least Daniels. I can read that both ways, but you know, there's an ongoing feud going. I think you said you had it, and if there, I know there's probably other screenshots you have, but maybe a good way to focus in and finish up on this is to talk about that last final scene and the transition between Carcetti and one of our newly acquired character actors for the Street Boys, right?
Yeah. Well, we're gonna see Carcetti, and this is leading up to the part that I caught, but basically, um, he stormed out of his campaign office because he was just, you know, depressed about his numbers weren't where they needed to be. And so he's like sitting on the park in the harbor, and the police come up, and he's there after hours, so they talk him into leaving. And in the background, you hear the siren.
Yeah.
And as the scene transitions, the siren carries through, providing this kind of continuity between them. So let's bring that up.
Yeah, it's great. And just as a little comment as you get it up is they were going to stop it with the Carcetti looking out over Baltimore and him having walked away. But they decided to go with that second scene, that after scene, which I think really makes the season. I mean, at least the episode.
There we go. Yeah. And another thing I really like about that is the way the camera lingers on the scenes. Like we talked about before, they have like so many scenes that they have to like fit into an hour, and they have to like compress things and find ways to get multiple things going at the same time just to fit it all in. But there we're sort of lingering on the harbor and the lights, and it's showing you like the big city, like wealth kind of thing going on, but you got that siren going in the background that carries right through to the next scene, which is run down,
Yeah.
that street looks like it's 19th century pavement.
Absolutely. And if you think about what Randy's going through there, Randy has, basically told Lex to go to this park, and that's where he meets his end. Lex, actually, we didn't really talk too much about it. He was jealous that Fruit was going out with his girlfriend Beatrice, I think her name was. He shoots Fruit in the head, and Beatrice freaks out. No, Patrice was her name. Patrice kind of freaks out. Obviously, him up. They realize who it is. They have him on the wire. Turns out that Bunk is trying to find Lex because they know he's going to be hit. But Lex is actually told to go to that park by Randy because he was given money by one of the folks in the corner to do it. And he didn't know exactly what he was doing. And what he realizes is that he had sent this kid to his death. And there he is on his corner, on his stoop, thinking about that, thinking about the implications. And as that scene was ending and Simon and Burns were talking about it, Burns said really beautifully, he's like, there's the first nail in the coffin of that kid's innocence. And I think that's what this season's about in many ways. 13 different nails in the innocence of these kids as they move on to adulthood, in West Baltimore. So it's a really remarkable start to what is arguably the best season of the show. So.
Yeah. So the sirens in Randy's case has multiple symbolism going on there.
Exactly. And that's just the art of the transition between those two scenes and the fact that they're deeply meaningful, both for Carcetti and what's lost in the city of Baltimore, but also for that forgotten part of Baltimore. It's just, again, striking that juxtaposition of those two worlds.
Yeah, I mean, the sound gives it a kind of continuity as it cuts from one to the other, but it also suggests that they're not that far apart. Like geographically, I don't know where the harbor is or where Randy is living, but the suggestion is that sound is like running through both areas.
And the argument that whose concern is greater. In many ways, Randy's. Like Carcetti's just a spoiled kid who not going to maybe get the election anymore. This kid is already carrying a burner. You know what I mean? For someone else's life.
Yeah. And what's Carcetti want to do? I mean, he just wants some personal glory, you know?
Exactly, and power.
Yeah. He's kind of like McNulty, he's not doing this for what the job is, he's doing it for himself,
Yeah.
So he can win, whatever it is.
Yeah, it's great. Looking forward to more of season 4, because season 4 I haven't seen it in 3 years, so I watched this episode twice before we talked today, it was a joy to do it because, it's been a long time since I've seen it.
Yeah, good. So
all right.
We got something to look forward to coming up.
As always.
All right.
All right, Paul.
Wire 106.
For life.
All right.